few hours before a wild bobcat ever touched the clinic floor. Red Hollow was the kind of quiet that makes you think nothing big could happen there. It was late evening at Red Hollow Animal Care, the little vet clinic on the edge of town. You know the kind of place. A low building with too many coats on the same hook, a parking lot light that hums louder than the traffic, and a hand-painted sign that's been faded by years of sun and snow. Inside, the day was supposed to be over. Dr. Nolan Hart was finishing charts in the back, his pen moving more slowly with each line. In the lobby, Claire clicked through the last appointments on the computer, her coffee long gone lukewarm. Emily Rhodes stood at the stainless steel sink, rinsing off a set of instruments, watching the water steam in the cold air that sneaked under the doors whenever the wind picked up. Nothing dramatic, just 3 people doing the quiet work that keeps a town's animals going. Outside, the first flakes of the storm were starting to fall. Not a blizzard yet, just a light dusting across the empty road, frosting the pickup trucks parked along Main Street. The kind of snow you don't take seriously at first. Inside the clinic, there was an old beagle asleep under one of the chairs, snoring softly, paws twitching as if he was chasing something in a dream. Someone had forgotten a scarf on the coat rack. A kid's drawing of a cat, big ears, too many whiskers, was taped crookedly near the reception desk. If you've ever been in a small waiting room after hours, you know this feeling. The phone has stopped ringing, the rush is over, but the lights are still on. The space feels almost like a living room that belongs to everyone and no one at the same time. Emily turned off the faucet and shook the water from her hands. Nolan called out, "You can head home if you want, Em. Roads will get slick." She smiled without looking up. "I'm all right," she said. "Storms don't bother me as much as empty houses do." She didn't explain what she meant. She didn't have to. Nolan had worked with her long enough to hear the story behind the sentence, the kind of childhood where long nights weren't always safe, and where you learned early that a room with people and bright light was a good place to be. That's the thing about places like this. On paper, it's a vet clinic. In reality, it's where people take the creatures they love most when they're scared and don't know what else to do. Cats, dogs, barn animals, sometimes the odd raccoon in a borrowed crate. The sign outside says animal care, but there's always a little bit of people care folded in. We don't tend to think about those rooms until we need them, but there are folks like Nolan and Emily in almost every small town across the United States. Staying late, wiping down counters, making sure there's a light on in case somebody knocks. They have no idea that before the night is over, they'll be the ones stunned by what walks through that door. Out in the parking lot, the snow started to come down a little harder. The wind found its voice and began to push against the glass. Claire glanced at the forecast on her screen and shook her head. "Looks like it's going to be a rough one," she murmured. She was talking about the weather. She had no way of knowing that somewhere beyond the tree line, a bobcat was already moving through the dark, and a young girl was running out of strength. If this kind of quiet, ordinary night feels familiar to you, the slow hours, the small tasks, the sense that nothing big ever happens where you are, I'd invite you to stay with me a little longer. Because on this particular night, the edge of town was exactly where everything changed. In the next part, we'll step outside with the storm and follow the tracks that are already being laid in the snow, long before anyone in Red Hollow realizes who and what is heading their way. By the time the storm truly settled over the ridges above Red Hollow, the bobcat had already been walking for hours. Out there, away from the town lights, the world had shrunk to wind and white. Snow came sideways, not gently anymore, but in hard sheets that stuck to fur and froze in whiskers. These that usually stood tall and sure were nothing but dark smudges in a moving wall of gray. This is where a bobcat is supposed to be most at home, in the wild, in the dark, slipping between shadows where people rarely go. In most of the United States, folks never even see one. They just notice the tracks in fresh snow, a flash of spotted fur on a trail cam, the way the woods go suddenly quiet when a predator passes through. But that night, the quiet broke. Somewhere between those trees, a small sound rose through the wind. Not an animal call, not anything wild. A human sound. The sharp, thin cry of a girl who'd run farther than her legs were ready for. The bobcat heard it. He didn't understand words, didn't know names. What he understood was tone. The high edge of panic, the stumbling footfalls, the smell of fear and cold sweat on the air. And under that, something else. The heavy, angry rhythm of another set of footsteps behind her. For a moment, instinct did exactly what you'd expect. He crouched low, ready to slide away to let these strange, noisy creatures pass through his forest and leave him out of it. But then, the girl fell. It was clumsy and human and painful. A cry, a thud, the scratching of hands on icy ground. The footsteps behind her did not stop. They sped up. The bobcat stepped out of the brush. We'll never know exactly how it looked through his eyes. What we can see are the signs left behind. A patch of churned snow, a smear of blood at the height of his shoulder. The drag marks where someone was shoved, then pulled. Whatever happened in those seconds, it ended with the girl crumpled and shaking, and the bobcat standing between her and the man who'd been chasing her. Most wild animals would bolt. That's not a criticism, that's survival. But this one didn't. He took the hit. You can see it later in the clinic. The deep tear in his shoulder that didn't come from a branch or a rock. Pain cut through him like fire. But he didn't turn away. Somewhere in the scramble, Lily's hands found his fur. Fingers dug into his coat, not to hurt, just to hold on. When the shouting faded and the woods went quiet again, the storm moved in to take its place. The temperature dropped. The snow deepened. The man was gone for the moment, but the cold was not. The bobcat could have left her there. Every instinct said go. Instead, he did something almost no one watching this would expect from a wild predator. He knelt. He dipped his shoulder under her, muscles trembling, and let her weight roll onto his back. Claws bit into ice as he rose. He knew the game trails, the sheltered gullies, the direction of the wind, and in the distance, through the trees and the snow and the night, there was the faintest glow of human light. So he walked, step after painful step, lungs burning, that wounded shoulder screaming with every movement. Lily's body shifted with each stride, one small hand still tangled in his fur. Sometimes her breath shuddered. Sometimes it barely moved at all. The storm howled around them, but he kept going, following that thin, stubborn line between fear and purpose. If you've ever had an animal stay close to you on a hard day, a dog that wouldn't leave your side, a cat that settled on your chest when you couldn't sleep, you know this feeling. They don't give speeches. They don't fix everything. They just refuse to leave, and somehow that changes the story. Some folks say animals don't care about us. Others say they care too much. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. On that ridge above Red Hollow, a bobcat didn't weigh out philosophy. He just made one simple decision. I'm not leaving her here. And that decision turned a private nightmare in the woods into a miracle in a pool of fluorescent lobby light. If that thought stirs something in you, you're welcome to tuck one of your own memories beside it. An animal that stayed when you needed someone to, and carry it with you as we go on. And if you'd like to keep walking through stories like this together, you're always welcome to stay, to listen, to subscribe, so we can meet here again. Because while Cedar and Lily were pushing their way through the storm, back at Red Hollow Animal Care, the automatic doors were closed, the floors were dry, and no one inside had any idea that in just a few minutes, a wild bobcat and a wounded girl would step out of the night and ask them the same quiet question. Will you help us? The moment the bobcat's paws touched that linoleum floor, the whole vet clinic forgot how to breathe. The automatic doors at Red Hollow Animal Care slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, cutting off the roar of the blizzard. For a heartbeat, it was just quiet. Too quiet. You could hear the old clock in the lobby, the soft whir of the heater, and somewhere under one of the chairs, the beagle snoring right through history. Then Claire's coffee cup slipped from her hand. It hit the floor and skidded, sending a brown arc across the white tile. She didn't even look down. Her eyes stayed fixed on the wild bobcat standing in the doorway, snow melting off his coat in dark drops, shoulders shaking with each breath. Across his back, the girl hung limp. Emily saw it all from the back hall. First the spill, then Claire's face, then that shape too big to be a house cat. She stepped forward, and for a second, her brain tried to label what she was seeing with something safer. Injured dog, weirdly marked mutt. Anything but a wild bobcat in a storm with a child draped over him. But there it was. The bobcat stood very still, head slightly lowered. Lily's small arms hung down along his sides, swinging gently with each shallow rise of his chest. One of her hands was still tangled in his fur, fingers clenched even in unconsciousness. Nolan came up behind Emily and stopped cold. No one spoke. No one moved. The air felt like it had thickened into glass between them. Man, beast, and child held in a fragile triangle. If anyone rushed, if anyone grabbed, that glass might shatter. The bobcat made the first sound. A low, rough rumble rolled out of his chest. Not sharp enough to be a snarl, not soft enough to be a purr. A warning, as old as the mountains outside. Don't come any closer. Not yet. This is the part people sometimes forget about. Trust. It doesn't arrive with a big speech and a handshake. It starts with everyone in the room admitting they're scared, and then choosing not to run. Nolan lifted his hands slowly, palms empty. He took one careful step forward and then stopped when the bobcat's ears flicked back. "All right," he murmured, more to the air than anything else. "We'll do this your way." Emily felt something old wake up inside her. That same instinct she'd had walking into new foster homes, standing in doorways, wondering if the faces on the couch were going to be safe. She knew the feeling of being the one carried in, and also the one standing on the inside, trying not to spook a frightened stranger. So she did what no one had told her to do. She got smaller. Emily slowly crouched down, bringing herself closer to the bobcat's eye level instead of towering above him. She kept her hands in front of her, fingers open, voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," she said gently. "You got her here. You did so well." The words weren't for understanding. They were for tone, for rhythm, for every creature in that room whose heart was beating too fast. The bobcat's gaze flicked from Nolan to Emily, then back again. His muscles trembled with exhaustion. For a moment, it looked like he might bolt or lunge or collapse. Instead, he made a different choice. Very carefully, he shifted one paw back, bent his legs, and began to lower himself toward the floor. Lily rolled off his back like a feather that had forgotten it was heavy, right into Emily's waiting arms. That was the first crack in the glass. If you've ever had a moment where someone, human or animal, trusted you before you trusted yourself, you know how sacred that feels. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's just two lives meeting halfway on a thin line of tile and deciding without words to try. Maybe that's the small lesson tucked into this strange night in a small United States town. Sometimes courage is just staying still long enough for trust to have a chance. Emily gathered Lily close, feeling how cold her skin was even through the fabric. Nolan stepped in, hands steady now that the girl was in human arms. Behind them, the bobcat tried to stand again, stumbled, and instead dragged himself to the exam room doorway, refusing to let her out of his sight. If this kind of quiet, ordinary bravery speaks to something in you, you're always welcome to stay with these stories a little longer. And if you'd like more evenings like this, slow, honest, and full of unlikely courage, you can subscribe so we don't lose each other in the noise. Because on the other side of that exam room door, the next battle was just beginning. Saving not one life, but two, and honoring the bond that had carried them through the storm. By the time the exam room door clicked shut, it felt like the whole vet clinic was holding its breath. On one side of the room, a little girl lay on the metal table, swallowed up in blankets. On the other hand, the wild bobcat that had carried her there was slumped on the floor, sides heaving, blood dried dark along its shoulder. 2 lives, a few feet apart, both hanging on by threads. Nolan moved first. "Let's start with her," he said quietly. Emily lay Lily down on the heated pad as gently as she could. The child's skin was so cold it almost didn't feel real under her fingers. Her lashes were clumped with half-melted snow. Her lips had the faint blue tint of someone who'd been out in the storm too long. They worked in a rhythm born from years in that little clinic at the edge of town. Warm IV fluids, oxygen mask, dry towels. Emily tucked the blankets in close, one layer, then another, talking softly even though Lily gave no sign she could hear. "You're safe," she whispered, more than once. "You're inside now. We've got you." As the warmth began to creep back into the girl's fingers, the details came into focus. A small bracelet on her wrist, threaded with cheap beads, and one tiny metal charm shaped like a cat. The kind of thing a child would pick out at a gas station or a school fair and never want to take off. Emily's chest tightened. Somewhere before the cabin, before the storm, there'd been a little girl who loved cats enough to wear one on her wrist. A girl who drew bobcats on the corners of her homework and begged for stories about the woods. Then Emily noticed the bruises. Not just one. Not "I fell in the snow" bruises. Faded marks on Lily's arms and fresh ones at her wrists, like someone had held on too hard and too often. A faint line around one forearm, thin and straight, where a rope or a zip tie might have been. She didn't say anything right away. She just met Nolan's eyes. He saw it too. "We'll document everything," he said softly. "But first we keep her here. We keep her alive." Behind them, the bobcat let out a rough, broken sound. It wasn't loud, but in that small room, it might as well have been a shout. Even slumped against the wall, he was watching. Whenever Emily or Nolan moved closer to Lily, his gaze tracked their hands. His claws pressed weakly into the tile. Nolan crossed the space between them, keeping his movements slow. "Your turn, big guy," he murmured. Up close, the damage was worse. The wound on the bobcat's shoulder was deep, the fur matted and stiff with blood. His breathing had that uneven hitch that tells a vet exactly how close the edge is. This was more than a scratch from a branch. Something, or someone, had driven something hard into him. "We'll need to sedate him if we're going to clean this properly," Nolan said. "Otherwise he'll fight us every step." Emily nodded, but when she stepped closer with the syringe, the bobcat's eyes locked onto hers. For a second, she saw the same thing she'd seen when he lowered Lily from his back. Fear and trust tangled together. "It's all right," she said quietly. "You did your part. Let us do ours." She eased the needle in. His muscles tensed once, then slowly, reluctantly, began to soften. Even as the sedative pulled him under, his head turned toward the table where Lily lay. His eyes stayed on her until they finally closed. If you've ever sat between 2 beds in a hospital room, one hand on a loved one, the other on a friend, you know this strange, heavy feeling, looking back and forth, wondering how you're supposed to divide your care, your worry, your prayers. That's what Red Hollow Animal Care became that night. Not just a vet clinic, not just an emergency room. A thin strip of light between the dark things that had chased these two into the storm. Maybe the quiet lesson here is that sometimes we're called to hold more than we think we can. 2 patients, 2 stories, 2 kinds of pain. And the best we can do is what Nolan and Emily did, go 1 heartbeat at a time and refuse to look away. If this part of the story stirs memories of your own, long nights by a monitor, silent promises made over someone's bedside, you're welcome to stay with us. And if you'd like more gentle stories of courage and care, you can subscribe so we don't lose each other in the shuffle. Because as the night went on, another question began to rise, as inevitable as the wind outside. Who had hurt this child? Who had wounded this bobcat? And were they really gone from Red Hollow's door? By the time the storm wrapped itself tight around Red Hollow, someone else was staring at the same clouds and asking a different question. Where did she come from? That someone was Sheriff Ellen Ward. Her phone had rung not long after the bobcat walked into the clinic. The words "unidentified minor" and "possible abuse" are the kind that pull a sheriff out into any weather. She drove through the whiteout with the wipers on high, the radio a low murmur of road closures and wind warnings. When she stepped into Red Hollow Animal Care, the warmth hit her face, and so did the smell. Antiseptic, wet fur, and something metallic underneath. She followed Nolan down the hall and took in the scene in one long, steady look. Lily, bundled in blankets, the bobcat sedated but breathing, Emily hovering between them like a bridge. Ellen couldn't fix what had already been done, but she could follow the trail back and make sure it stopped there. She started with the simple things. That's what good law work is most nights. Not big TV moments. Just be careful looking. She knelt near the foot of the exam table, nodding toward Lily's boots. They were still on, laces stiff with frozen mud. "Mind if I take a look?" she asked. Emily swallowed and shook her head. Ellen lifted one boot gently, turned it in the light. The tread was caked, not with the usual gray slush from town, but with a deeper, reddish clay. Caught between the grooves were a few long, dark pine needles. "That's not from Main Street," she murmured. Out loud, she said, "These are mountain trails, higher up, past the last cabins." In small towns across the United States, there's always someone who knows exactly where the soil changes color, where the road turns to rock, where the cell service dies out. Ellen was that someone. She'd followed that red dirt before, on search and rescue calls, on welfare checks that came too late. Her eyes shifted to the bobcat, stretched out on the pad. Even half under, even battered, he looked like a piece of that landscape had stepped inside and laid down its testimony on the clinic floor.
"The forest brought her here,"
she said softly.
"and so did he."
Out in the lobby, she called a deputy, gave careful directions. Follow the ridge past the fire road. Look for broken branches. Listen for any sign of recent use. No sirens, no lights. Snow would already be covering most of it, but there is always something left for those willing to see it. Later, when the deputy's voice crackled back through the radio with words like "isolated cabin" and "fresh tracks," Ellen just closed her eyes for a second. Not in surprise, she'd been expecting that part, but in something closer to sorrow. We like to believe bad things happen somewhere else. Somewhere bigger, louder, further away. But often, the hardest truths sit right up against the places we feel safest. At the tree line behind town, just beyond the last mailbox. The trail back to the cabin was more than physical. It was a line that needed to be walked so Lily wouldn't have to. So the next child wouldn't have to. So the bobcat's wound would mean something beyond a scar. If you've ever had to go back over old ground, an old house, an old habit, an old hurt, you know how heavy that can feel. But sometimes, retracing steps is an act of mercy, not punishment. You're not going back to relive it. You're going back so it can't keep reaching forward. Maybe that's the small lesson in Ellen's quiet drive toward the hills. Someone has to follow the trail all the way to the door that should have been closed a long time ago. If stories of steady people doing the slow, necessary work of justice sit close to your heart, you're welcome to keep walking with us. And if you'd like more evenings like this, soft-spoken but honest, you can subscribe so we can meet back here without getting lost in the algorithm. Because even as Ellen's truck turned toward the dark tree line, another kind of danger was circling much closer to the clinic. And inside, between Lily and the bobcat, Emily was about to realize that the storm outside wasn't the only thing pressing against their doors. When the plows finally cleared the roads, and the last of the storm slid off the clinic roof, the hardest part of that night in Red Hollow should have been over. But anyone who's lived a little knows the weather passes faster than the wounds do. In the days after the bobcat walked into that vet clinic carrying Lily, town life divided itself into two quiet fronts of healing. One front was at the hospital. Lily woke up slowly, in bits and pieces, not like in the movies, with one big gasp and a perfect sentence, but in the real way children do after they've been through too much. A flutter of eyelids one day, a squeezed hand the next, a whisper of, "Where's the cat?" before sleep pulled her back under. Nurses brought her warm socks and the gentlest voices they owned. A volunteer with gray hair and kind hands sat by her bed a few afternoons a week, reading stories about forests and small, brave creatures. When Lily startled awake from nightmares, someone was there to say, "You're in a safe place now. That night is over. You're not alone." The second front of healing was back at Red Hollow Animal Care, in a small, dim recovery room behind the main vet clinic. The wild bobcat lay on a thick pad, his shoulder wrapped, an IV line taped carefully to his leg. The first few days were touch and go. His breathing stayed shallow. He drifted in and out, sometimes twitching like he was still climbing those snowy ridges outside town. Emily came in early and stayed late. She learned the rhythm of his chest, the way his ears would turn when someone opened the door. One afternoon, as she adjusted his bandage, she said softly, "She made it, you know. She's warm. She's eating a little. You did that." Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. But his breathing eased just a little. Word spread through Red Hollow the way it does in small United States towns. Not in headlines, but in whispers over coffee and after church. "Did you hear about the bobcat at the vet? The one that carried that girl through the storm? They say he nearly died doing it." People started showing up at the clinic without necessarily needing anything done. Someone left a small stuffed bobcat at the front desk with a note taped to its paw. "For the girl, when she's ready to come back." A man who didn't say much dropped off 3 casseroles with reheating instructions written in careful block letters. Margaret Cole from up on the hill came in with a quilt she'd stayed up late to finish, soft blues and greens stitched together, and asked if maybe it could go to Lily. If she might like something pretty that isn't a hospital blanket. On a quiet morning, Sheriff Ellen Ward stopped by with an update Nolan didn't even have to ask for. The man from the cabin was in custody. There would be charges. Investigators were looking into whether anyone else had ever been taken out there. She didn't use big words like closure. She just laid a hand on the exam table and said, "He's not coming back for her. That's my promise." If you've ever watched a community rally around someone in trouble, a family with a house fire, a neighbor with a diagnosis, you know this feeling. The problem doesn't disappear, but meals appear on doorsteps. Cards show up in the mail. People who haven't spoken in years stand shoulder to shoulder at a fundraiser. Healing starts to look less like a dramatic moment and more like 1,000 small kindnesses strung together. Maybe that's the fresh perspective here, that the wild courage of one bobcat got Lily through the storm, but the steady, ordinary kindness of a town would carry her through the long thaw afterward. The small lesson, if there is one, might be this. You don't have to rescue someone from a blizzard to change their story. Sometimes you just have to be the person who leaves a light on, or drops off a casserole, or sits in a chair by a hospital bed so a child doesn't wake up to an empty room. If that kind of quiet, everyday heroism reminds you of your own town, or of a time people showed up for you, you're welcome to tuck that memory beside this one. And if you'd like to keep sharing evenings with stories like this, you can subscribe so we don't lose each other in the noise. Because as Lily and the bobcat slowly mended, one in a hospital room, one in a vet clinic, the people of Red Hollow knew there was one more question they could no longer put off. What should happen to a wild heart who had crossed into the human world for all the right reasons? Long after the snowbanks shrank and the roads turned back to wet pavement, one question kept circling the little clinic at the edge of Red Hollow. What do you do with a wild heart that saved a human life? That was the problem on the table one evening as the sun went down behind the pines. In the small break room at Red Hollow Animal Care, Nolan, Emily, Sheriff Ellen Ward, and a wildlife officer from the state sat around a scarred wooden table that had seen its share of coffee rings and late-night decisions. Cedar, the bobcat who had walked into their lives carrying Lily, was healing. His shoulder wound had closed into a clean scar. His eyes were brighter now, the heavy fog of pain and medication lifted. He'd begun to move around his enclosure with that loose, Fluid grace bobcats are known for. Muscles remembering what it felt like to belong to open country instead of four walls. And that was exactly the point. He's still a wild animal, the wildlife officer said gently. A predator. He did something extraordinary, but his nature hasn't changed. Emily stared down at her hands. She'd spent hours sitting outside Cedar's enclosure, chart in her lap, legs falling asleep on the hard bench. She'd watched him flinch less at the sound of doors, watched him blink slowly when she spoke, watched his ears tilt every time Lily's name came up. Lily had been asking questions too. At the hospital, she'd traced the bobcat charm on her bracelet and whispered, "Is he going to have to live in a cage now? Because of me?" Nobody wanted that answer, so they talked through the options, quietly and carefully. Keeping him at the clinic wasn't safe long-term, for him or for the people who came and went. Dumping him back in the woods like nothing had happened would be a betrayal of the trust he'd already shown. There had to be a middle ground. The wildlife officer mentioned a sanctuary a few hours away. Forested enclosures, plenty of space, professional caretakers who understood bobcats and other wildcats. A place where Cedar could be what he was without being pushed into performing for anyone. He'd have room to roam, the officer said. Trees, rocks, no busy road 30 feet away. And Lily? Emily asked quietly. Would she ever see him again? They agreed on a plan that balanced both. Cedar would stay at the clinic until he was strong enough for transport. After that, he'd go to the sanctuary. And as long as it was safe, Lily would be allowed to visit, to stand at the fence and know he was alive, not wondering. It didn't answer everything, but it was a start. Later that week, Emily brought Lily to the clinic for a follow-up. Her steps were still a little cautious, but there was color back in her cheeks. Nolan explained the plan in simple, honest terms. He's not a pet, sweetheart, he said. He's a bobcat. He needs trees and sky. But we're not going to forget him, and we're certainly not going to let him forget you. Lily thought about that for a long time. When Nolan pulled out a chart labeled Unknown Bobcat, she frowned. He needs a real name, she said, not just Bobcat. All right, he smiled. What should we put here? Lily looked out the window toward the tree line. The pines were dark against the late afternoon sky, their branches moving in the wind. She touched the scar on her wrist where a rope had once been, then rested her hand on her bracelet instead. Cedar, she said finally. He smelled like trees when he carried me. And cedars stay green in winter. They don't give up when it's cold. In the recovery room, Cedar lifted his head slowly when they said it out loud. Hey, Cedar, Emily tried, testing the sound. His ears turned toward her. His body didn't tense. If anything, he seemed to settle, as if the word put something in the room that hadn't been there before. A promise that he wasn't just the bobcat from the news, but someone whose courage had been seen and named. If you've ever had to let go of something you loved, a home, a season of life, even an animal who needed more than you could give, you know this ache. But naming it, blessing it, sending it somewhere better, that can be its own kind of love. Maybe the small lesson tucked in here is that respect and gratitude can walk side by side. We can honor a wild heart without trying to tame it. We can say thank you, and also, you're free. If those kinds of choices resonate with you, you're always welcome in this little circle of stories. And if you'd like to keep sharing gentle evenings like this, about animals, second chances, and the promises we make to each other, you can subscribe so we don't drift apart. Because Cedar's story wasn't finished yet. There was still one more morning, one more meeting, where a bobcat and a girl would stand on opposite sides of a fence and show Red Hollow and the rest of us what a quiet goodbye can really mean. What stunned the people of Red Hollow in the end wasn't the night a bobcat walked into a vet clinic carrying a wounded girl. It was what happened quietly afterward, in the soft light of an ordinary morning. The sky was clear the day they said goodbye. No blizzard, no sirens, no rush, just a cool breeze moving through the pines and a thin layer of frost still clinging to the grass around the sanctuary enclosures. Cedar was stronger now. His shoulder had healed. He paced less, more interested in the sway of branches and the scurry of small animals than in the comings and goings of people. But that morning, when a car from Red Hollow pulled up and a small figure stepped out, something in him shifted. Lily walked slowly toward the fence, Mrs. Cole's quilt draped around her shoulders like a little cape. Emily kept one hand on her back, not because Lily was likely to fall, but because it felt good to have someone there. They stopped a few feet from the enclosure. Cedar lifted his head, caught their scent on the air, and came forward. No one told him to. He just did. For a long moment, there were no words. Lily rested her palm on the wire, fingers curled lightly around the cool metal. Cedar stepped up until his forehead was nearly touching the same spot from the other side. The fence that separated them was real, there for his safety and hers, but the way they leaned toward each other, you could almost forget it. In another time, in another story, this scene would be loud. Music would swell, people would cheer, and cameras would flash. Here, there was only breath. Lily's still a little shaky. Cedar's slow and even now. Wind moved through the cedar trees that had given him his name. A crow called once and fell silent again. Lily didn't deliver a speech. She just whispered,
Hi, Cedar. I'm okay.
The bobcat blinked, that slow, heavy blink cats give the ones they trust. His tail flicked once, not in agitation, but in acknowledgement. If you've ever had an animal look at you like that, a dog who knows your home before you open the door, a barn cat who chooses your lap and no one else's, you know how much can fit into a moment with no shared language. Nolan, standing a little back with Sheriff Ward, cleared his throat quietly and pretended to study the fencing. Emily brushed a fingertip under her eye and told herself it was just the cold. Everyone there understood they were seeing something rare, and they wanted to get out of the way and let it happen. The story that spread through town after that wasn't just a bobcat saved a girl. It became a wild animal didn't give up on her, and we didn't give up on him. In a world where so many headlines are sharp and fast and gone by morning, this one settled in a little deeper. Hawks in Red Hollow found themselves driving a bit more slowly past the tree line. They left their porch lights on a little longer in winter. They treated the wild edges around town with a little more respect, knowing that somewhere out there, bobcats were moving through the shadows, carrying their own quiet stories. Maybe that's what stays when the shock wears off. Not the blizzard, not the sirens, not even the moment Cedar first walked into that vet clinic. What lingers is the way a child who'd been hurt began to believe, one small step at a time, that she was worth crossing a storm for. And the way a wild heart went back to the forest, not as a monster or a pet, but as a neighbor who had been seen and honored. As you sit with this, you might find yourself thinking of your own storms. Maybe there was a night when someone, person or animal, refused to leave you alone in it. Maybe you've been that steady presence for someone else, without even realizing how much it mattered. It can be a comforting thing to remember that even in the hardest seasons, there are still cedars and lilies out there, carrying each other a few more steps down the road. If this story of a bobcat, a brave girl, and a small town touched something in you, I'd love to gently invite you to do two things. Take a moment after this video ends to ask yourself, where have I seen this kind of quiet courage in my own life? Let that memory be a reminder that you are not alone. And if you'd like to stay close to more stories like this, slow, real, and full of second chances, you're welcome to like this video and subscribe so we can keep meeting here and sharing these evenings. And if your heart is pulled toward helping more tangibly, there's one more step you can take. By using Super Thanks or choosing to donate through this channel, you help us shine more light on the work of rescuing and healing wild animals like bobcats, creatures who share our landscapes and sometimes carry our stories when we can't carry them alone. Thank you for being here, for caring, and for walking through this storm with us.